We continue 1, April 10th, Aleph, the Fool. The Voice of the Silence, the Two Paths, the Seven Portals. We've gotten past the initial text by Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. 8 degrees equals third house, and a commentary by Frater O.M. 7 degrees equals fourth house. So, Aleister Crowley. The Prefatory Note. And these remarks are particularly applicable to the present treatise, for the issues are presented in so confused a manner that one almost wonders whether Madame Blavatsky was not a reincarnation of the woman with the issue of blood familiar to readers of the Gospels. It is astonishing and distressing to note this, how the Lanu, no matter what happens to him, soaring aloft like the Fang and sailing gloriously through innumerable gates of high initiation, nevertheless keeps his original point of view. Like a bourbon, he is always getting rid of illusions, but like the entourage of the Cardinal Lord Archbishop of Reims, after he cursed the thief, nobody seems one penny the worse, or better. Probably the best way to take the whole treatise is to assume that it is written for the absolute tyro, with a good deal between the lines for the more advanced mystic. This will excuse to the Mahatma snob a good deal of apparent triviality and crudity of standpoint. It is, of course, necessary for the commentator to point out just those things which the novice is not expected to see. He will have to show mysteries in many grades, and each reader must glean his own wheat. Love is law, love and will. Fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts. Fragment 1, and we see the Lam alien being drawn there. That's his hands together in front of him, isn't it? Clasped together like that. But we can't per se show the... Lam is the Tibetan word for way or path, and Lama is he who goeth. Okay. And we start with 1. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Nothing less can satisfy than this motion in your orbit. It is important to reject any idea of which you may become possessed. Firstly, because of the wasting of energy, which should rather be concentrated on further advance, and secondly, because idei are in many cases so seductive that they lead the unwary to forget altogether the real purpose of their endeavors. The student must be prepared for temptations of the most extraordinary subtlety, as the scriptures of the Christians mystically put it. In their queer but often illuminating jargon, the devil can disguise himself as an angel of light. A species of parenthesis is necessary thus early in this comment. One must warn the reader that he is going to swim in very deep waters. To begin with, it is assumed throughout that the student is already familiar with at least the elements of mysticism. True, you are supposed to be ignorant of the dangers of the lower idei, but there are really quite a lot of people, even in Boston, who do not know that there are any idei at all, low or high. However, one who has been assiduous with Book 4 by Frater Perdurabo should have no difficulty so far as the general comprehension of the subject matter of the book is concerned. Too ruddy a cheerfulness on the part of the assiduous one will, however, be premature, to say the least, for the fact is that the treatise does not contain an intelligible and coherent cosmogony. The unfortunate Lanu is in the position of a sea captain who is furnished with the most elaborate and detailed sailing instructions, but is not allowed to have the slightest idea of what port he is to make, still less given a chart of the ocean. One finds himself Accordingly, in a sort of child Roland to the dark tower came atmosphere. That poem of Browning owes much of its haunting charm to this very circumstance that the reader is never told who Childe Roland is, or why he wants to get to the dark tower, or what he expects to find when he does get there. There is a skillfully constructed atmosphere of giants and ogres and hunchbacks, and the rest of the apparatus of fairy tales, but there is no trace of the influence of Baedeker in the style. Now, this is really very irritating to anybody who happens to be seriously concerned to get to that tower. I remember as a boy what misery I suffered over this poem. Had Browning been alive, I think I would have sought him out. So seriously did I take the quest. The student of Blavatsky is equally handicapped. Fortunately, Book 4, Part 3 comes to the rescue once more with a rough sketch of the universe as it is conceived by those who know it, and a regular investigation of that book and the companion volumes ordered in the curriculum of the AA, fortified by steady persistence in practical personal exploration, will enable this voice of the silence to become a serious guide in some of the simpler obscurities which weigh upon the eyelids of the seeker. The voice of nada is soon heard by the beginner, especially during the practice of pranayama, control of breath force. At first it resembles distant surf, though in the adept it is more like the twittering of innumerable nightingales. But this sound is premonitory, as it were, the veil of more distinct and articulate sounds which come later. It corresponds in hearing to that dark veil which is seen when the eyes are closed, although, in this case, a certain degree of progress is necessary before anything at all is heard. The word indifferent here implies able to shut out. The Raja referred to is in that spot whence the thoughts spring. He turns out ultimately to be Mayan, the great magician described in the third author. See the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 5, the special supplement. Let the student notice that in his early meditations, all his thoughts will be under the tamo guna, the principle of inertia and darkness. When he has destroyed all those, he will be under the dominion of an entirely new set of the type of rajo guna, the principle of activity, and so on. The advanced student, a simple, ordinary thought which seems little or nothing to the beginner, becomes a great and terrible fountain of iniquity. And the higher he goes up to a certain point, the point of definite victory, the more that it's the case. The beginner can think, it is 10 o'clock, and dismiss the thought. To the mind of the adept, the sentence will awaken all its possible correspondences, all the reflections he has ever made on time, as also accidental sympathetics like Mr. Whistler's essay, and if these sufficiently far advance, all these thoughts enter hundreds and thousands, diverging from one thought will again converge and become the resultant of all those thoughts. He will get samadhi upon that original thought, and this will be a terrible enemy to his progress. The word mind, we should include all phenomena of mind, including samadhi itself. Any phenomenon has causes and produces results, and all these things are below the real. By the real is here meant the bandhatu. It is a corollary of verse 4. These texts may be interpreted in a quite elementary sense. It is, of course, the object of even the beginner to suppress mind and all its manifestations, but only as he advances will he discover what mind means. There is a somewhat elementary result. Concentration on any subject leads soon enough to a sudden and overwhelming conviction that the object is unreal. The reason of this may perhaps be, speaking philosophically, that the object, whatever it is, has only a relative existence. See the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 4, page 150. 1.59. By the many are meant primarily noises which take place outside the student, and secondly, those which take place inside him, for example, the pulsation of the blood in the ears, and later the mystic sounds which are described in verse 40. By the Patanjali Sutras, didn't I share about that? By Sat, the true, is meant a thing previous to the real referred to above. Sat itself is an illusion. Some schools of philosophy have a Sat, non-being, which is beyond Sat, and consequently is to Shiva Darshana, as Sat is to Atma Darshana. Nirvana is beyond both these. By the harmony within is meant that state in which neither object of sense nor physiological sensations nor emotions can disturb the concentration of thought. In the text, the image is explained as man, but it more properly refers to the consciousness of man, which consciousness is considered as being a reflection of the non-ego, or a creation of the ego, according to the school of philosophy to which the student may belong. Any actual object of the senses is considered as a precipitation of an ideal, just as no existing triangle is a pure triangle, since it must either be equilateral, isosceles, or scaling. So every object is a miscarriage of an ideal. In the course of practice, one concentrates upon a given thing, rejecting this outer appearance and arriving at that ideal, which of course will not in any way resemble any of the objects which are its incarnations. It is with this in view that the verse tells us that the soul must be united to the silent speaker. The word silent speaker must be considered as a hieroglyph for some character as logos, etne, or the ineffable name. The word here alludes to the tradition that hearing is the organ of spirit, just as seeing is that of fire. The word remember might be explained as will attain to memory. Memory is the link between atoms of consciousness, for each successive consciousness of man is a single phenomenon and has no connection with any other. A looking glass knows nothing of the different people that look into it. It only reflects one at a time. The brain is, however, more like a sensitive plate, and a memory is the faculty of bringing up into consciousness any picture required. As this occurs in the normal man with his own experiences, so it occurs in the adept with all experiences. This is one more reason for his identifying himself with others. What follows must be regarded as the device of the poet, for of course the voice of the silence cannot be interpreted in words. What follows is only its utterance in respect of the path itself. In this verse, the student is exhorted to indifference to everything but his own progress. It does not mean that the indifference of the man to the things around him, as it has often been so unworthily and wickedly interpreted. The indifference spoken of is a kind of inner indifference. Everything should be enjoyed to the full, but always with the reservation that the absence of the thing enjoyed shall not cause regret. This is too hard for the beginner, and in many cases it is necessary for him to abandon pleasures in order to prove to himself that he is indifferent to them, and it may be occasionally advisable even for the adept to do this now and again. Of course, during periods of actual concentration, there is no time whatever for anything but the work itself. But to make even the mildest asceticism a rule of life is the gravest of errors, except perhaps that of regarding asceticism as a virtue. This latter always leads to spiritual pride, and spiritual pride is the principal quality of the brother of the left-hand path. Asceticism comes from the Greek askao, to work curiously, to adorn, to exercise, to train. The Latin ars is derived from this same word. Artist, in its finest sense of creative craftsmanship, is therefore the best translation. The word has denigrated under Puritan foulness. This verse deals with an obstacle at a more advanced stage. It is, again, a warning not to shut oneself up in one's own universe. It is not by the exclusion of the non-ego that saintship is attained, but by its inclusion. Love is the law, love under will. And even more advanced instruction, but still connected with the question of ego and the non-ego, the phenomenon described is perhaps Atma Darshana, which is still a delusion. In one sense, still a delusion of personality, for although the ego is destroyed in the universe, and the universe in it, there is a distinction, though exceedingly subtle, tendency to sum up its experience as ego. These three verses might be interpreted as quite elementary. Verse 14 is blindness to the first noble truth, everything is sorrow. Verse 15 as the coward's attempt to escape sorrow by retreat, and verse 16 as the acceptance of the astral as sought. Develops still further these remarks. I assume he means the great heresy, but twilight may here again refer to Atma Darshana. The last phrase is borrowed from Eliphas Levi, who was not, I believe, a Tibetan of antiquity. Madame Blavatsky humorously pretended that this book is an ancient Tibetan writing. The words give up may be explained as yield in its subtler or quasi-masochistic erotic sense, but on the higher plane, in the following quotation from the Great Law, it explains that the yielding is not the beginning, but the end of the path. So 55 through 62. Let the end awake. Long hast thou slept, O great God Terminus. Long ages hast thou waited at the end of the city, and the roads thereof. Awake thou, wait no more. Nay, Lord, but I am come to thee. It is I that wait at last. The prophet cried against the mountain, Come thou hither, that I may speak with thee. The mountain stirred not. Therefore went the prophet unto the mountain, and spake unto it. But the feet of the prophet were weary, and the mountain heard not his voice. But I have called unto thee, and I have journeyed unto thee, and it availed me not. I waited patiently, and thou wast with me from the beginning. This now I know, O my beloved, and we are stretched at our ease among the vines. But these thy prophets, they must cry aloud and scourge themselves. They must cross trackless wastes and unfathomed oceans. To await thee is the end, not the beginning. Liber 65, 55 through 62. Aum is here quoted as the hieroglyph of the eternal. A, the beginning sound, U, its middle, and M, its end. Together form a single word or trinity. Much like the sh, and then in Kabbalah, right? Indicating that the real must be regarded as of this threefold nature: birth, life, and death, not successive but one. Those who have reached trances in which time is no more will understand better than others how this may be. Getting rumbling to tumbling quite a bit here. The word know is especially used here in a technical sense. Avidya, ignorance. The first of the fetters is, moreover, one which excludes all the others. With regards to this swan aum, compare the following verses from the Great Law, Liber 65, 11, 17 through 25. Also, the Holy One came upon me, and I beheld a white swan floating in the blue. Between its wings I sat, and the ions fled away. Then the swan flew and dived and soared, yet no whither we went. A little crazy boy that rode with me spake unto the swan and said, Who art thou that dost float and fly and dive and soar in the inane? Behold, these many ions have passed. Whence camest thou? Whither wilt thou go? And laughing I chid him, saying, No whence, no whither. The swan being silent, he answered, Then if with no goal, why this eternal journey? And I laid my head against the head of the swan, and laughed, saying, Is there not joy ineffable in this aimless winging? Is there not weariness and impatience? or who would attain some goal. And the swan was ever silent. Ah, but we floated in the infinite abyss. Joy, joy, white swan, bear thou ever me up between thy wings. This verse may be compared with the similar statements in the Gospels, in the vision and the voice, and in the books of Thelemic. It does not mean asceticism in the sense usually understood by the word. The 12th author, see the Equinox, Volume 1, number 5, the supplement, gives the clearest explanation of this phrase. If this had been a genuine document, I should have taken the 3 states to be Siraptapana, etc., and the 4th Arhat, for which the reader should consult Science and Buddhism and similar treatises. But as it is better than genuine being, like the chemical marriage of Christian Rosenkreutz, the forgery of a great adept, one cannot too confidently refer it thus, for the 7 worlds are not Buddhism. These 3 halls correspond to the gunas: ignorance, tamas, learning, rajas, wisdom's sattva. Again, ignorance corresponds to malkuth, and nefesh, the animal soul, learning, jatiprith, and barak, the mind, and wisdom to binah and neshama, aspiration or divine mind. Now, whether we're talking Buddhism or otherwise, there's more than just individual chakra systems, that it's only, there's only one version, so. But we can sort of excuse Crowley for some of this because it seems that some of that information may not have been available in English. This hall is a very much larger region than that usually understood by the astral world. It would certainly include all states up to dhyana. The student will remember that his rewards immediately transmute themselves into temptations. Akshara is the same as the great sea of the Kabbalah. The reader must consult the Equinox for a full study of this great sea. The metaphor is somewhat changed. The hall of ignorance represents the physical life. Note carefully the phraseology. Let not thy mind mistake the fires of lust. It is legitimate to warm yourself by those fires so long as they do not deceive you. As in the lust isn't it, A similar lesson is taught in this verse. Do not imagine that your early psychic experiences are ultimate truth. Do not become a slave to your results. This lesson is confirmed. The wise ones tarry not. That is to say, they do not allow pleasure to interfere with business. The wise ones heed not. They listen to them, but do not necessarily attach importance to what they say. This apparently means that the only reliable guru is one who has attained the grade of Magister Templi. For the attainments of this grade, consult the Equinox, Volume 1, number 5, the supplement, etc. This is a resume of the previous 7 verses. It inculcates the necessity of unwavering aspiration, and in particular warns the advanced student against the accepting his rewards. There is one method of meditation in which the student kills thoughts as they arise by the reflection. That's not it. Frater P indicates the same by taking as his motto in the second order, which reaches from Yesod to Chesed. Oi ma. No, certainly not. I am inclined to believe that most of Blavatsky's notes are intended as blinds, light such as is described has a technical meaning. It would be too petty to regard Mara as a Christian would regard a man who offered him a cigarette. The supreme and blinding light of this jewel is the great vision of light. It is the light which streams from the threshold of nirvana, and Mara is the dweller on the threshold. It is absurd to call this light evil in any commonplace sense. It is the two-edged sword flaming every way that keeps the gate of the tree of life, and there is a further arcanum connected with this, which it would be improper here to divulge. The result of failing to reject rewards is the return to earth, the temptation to regard oneself as having attained, and so do no more work. In this metaphor is contained a warning against identifying the soul with human life from the failure of its aspirations. This verse reads at first as if the heresy were still possible in the Hall of Wisdom, but this is not as it seems. The disciples urged to find out his ego and slay it even at the beginning. This develops verse 35. The heaven-born is the human consciousness. The chamber of the heart is the anahata lotus. The abode of the world's mother is the Muladhara lotus. But there is a more technical meaning yet, and this whole verse describes the particular method of meditation, a final method which is far too difficult for the beginner. However, the equinox addresses all these points. The verse teaches that the concentration of the Kundalini in the Ajna chakra breath is that which goes to and fro, and refers to the uniting of Shiva with Shakti in the Sahasrara. This particularly refers to certain iddhi concerning understanding of devas, or what people call gods. Really the same thing as angels, more not really gods. So if you understand it, a lot of these things that we say gods, to give it an English word, or other beings. But people treat them as gods and goddesses, so, etc. Here this word wind may be interpreted as spirit. It is comparatively easy to reach this state, and it has no great importance. The walker of the sky is much superior to the mere reader of the minds of ants. Well, each thing has its purpose. That's a chapter of the ants, but the word 7 is here. But he wasn't a mere reader of the ants either. Solomon was more than that. The word 7 is here as so frequently rather poetic than mathematic, for there are many more. The verse also reads as if it were necessary to hear all the 7, and this is not the case. Some will get one and some another. Some students may even miss all of them. This might happen as the result of his having conquered and uprooted them, and fried their seeds in a previous birth. The first 4 are comparatively easy to obtain, and many can hear them at will. The last 3 are much rarer, not necessarily because they are more difficult to get and indicate a greater advance, but because the protective envelope of the adept is become so strong that they cannot pierce it. The last of the 7 sometimes occurs, not as a sound, but as an earthquake, if the expression may be permitted. It is a mingling of terror and rapture, impossible to describe, and as a general rule it is completely discharges the energy of the adept, leaving him weaker than an attack of malaria would do. But if the practice has been right, this soon passes off, and the experience has this advantage, that one is far less troubled with minor phenomena than before. It is just possible with this referred to in the Apocalypse, chapter 16, 17, and 18. The note tells that this refers to the 6 principles, so that the subject is completely changed. By the slaying of the principles is meant the withdrawal of the consciousness from them, their rejection by the seeker of truth. Sapapate Swami has an excellent method on these lines. It is given in an improved form in Liber HHH. See the Equinox, Volume 1, Number 5, page 5, also Book 4, Part 3, up 7. The lunar body is Nefesh, and the mind body Ruach. The heart is Tibereth, the center of Ruach. We are now again on the subject of suppressing thought. The pure water is the stilled mind, the torrent, the mind invaded by thoughts. It is not a mere poetic image. This dewdrop in the lotus is connected with the mantra, Aum Mani Padme Hum, and to what this verse really refers is known only to members of the 9th degree of OTO. So the jewel in the lotus, I forget what whom means. So in other words, they're saying it's a sexual reference. The text turns to the question of suppressing thoughts. Verse 44 has been inserted where it is in the hope of deluding the reader into the belief that it belongs to verses 43 and 45. For the arcanum which it contains is so dangerous that it must be guarded in all possible ways. Perhaps even to call attention to it is a blind intended to prevent the reader from looking for something else. It is now evident that by destroying or slaying is not meant a permanent destruction. If you can slay a thing at will, it means that you can revive it at will, for the word faculty implies repeated action. This is a very difficult verse because it appears so easy. It's not merely a question of Advaitism. It refers to the spiritual marriage. Advaitism is spiritual monism, This is, again, filled with deeper meaning than that which appears on the surface. The words bud and worm form a clue. Compare the scene in Parsifal, where the scenery comes to the night instead of the night going to the scenery, but there is also implied doctrine of the Tao, and one only who is an accomplished Taoist can hope to understand this verse. And nothing for 50 or 51 and 52 here. There is a counsel never to forget the original stimulus which has driven you to the path, the first noble truth. Everything is now good. That's why verse 53 says, these tears are the streams that irrigate the fields of charity immortal. Tears, by the way, think. The midnight blossom is a phrase connected with the doctrine of the night of Pan, familiar to masters of the temple. The poppy that flowers into dusk is another name for it. A most secret formula of magic is connected with this heart of the circle. By desire, in all mystical treatises of any merit, is meant tendency. Desire is manifested universally in the law of gravitation, in that of chemical attraction, and so on. In fact, everything that is done is caused by the desire to do it, in the technical sense of the word. The midnight blossom implies a certain monastic renunciation of all desire, which reaches to all planes. One must, however, distinguish between desire, which means a natural attraction to an ideal, and love, which is natural motion. This particularizes a special form of desire. The English is very obscure to anyone unacquainted with Buddhist literature. The everlasting referred to is not a life condition at all. The words desire nothing should be interpreted positively as well as negatively. The main sense of the rest of the verse is to advise the disciple to work and to not complain. Although the object of the disciple is to transcend law, he must work through the law to attain this end. It may be remarked that this treatise and this comment for the most part is written for disciples of certain grades only. It is altogether inferior to such books as Liber 111, Aleph, but for that very reason more useful perhaps to the average seeker. This verse reminds of one of the writings of the alchemists, and it should be interpreted as the best of them would have interpreted. The gates are described in the third treatise. The words spirit and soul are highly ambiguous and had better be regarded as poetic figures without a technical meaning to be sought.